My worst fear is not that Russia invades on two fronts, but that something worse happens and that we make the mistake of bombing some emplacements in Russia. We, the U.S. or NATO. We did it in Serbia. We repainted United States warplanes, as everyone well knows, with NATO markings, and our bombers bombed Serbia. They bombed every bridge on the Danube River, which had not happened ever in history, by the way. The Serbs looked up and said, wait a minute. The last time we saw planes flying over Belgrade was when the Nazis were bombing us. They were heartbroken because they were great allies of America during World War II. They couldn't believe what we were doing to them. They weren't fooled by the NATO markings. I fear that this government could take United States weaponry, repaint it with NATO markings, and start bombing into Russia. You think that's a crazy possibility?
You know, Doctor, I don't know. I really don't know. But what I can tell you is that I saw a German general with tears in his eyes when we bombed Belgrade.
At the time?
Yes, because he said all of us supported NATO because we believed that NATO's mission was to prevent another war in Europe from ever breaking out. And he said, here we are waging war against another European nation. The Germans overwhelmingly were uncomfortable with that. All the German officers disliked it intensely.
So it was a Secretary of Hate, Madeleine Albright, who was literally dancing with glee during the bombing with her mad assistant, Jamie. I remember very well because I went on the air for 37 straight days, eating my guts out over this. I was the only one in American broadcasting who understood how disastrous this was for the world that Clinton would do this, and he did it. And I'm afraid that the same mentality, the same mindset is operational right now.
Well, it may be, but the thing we need to keep in mind, and this is something I repeat over and over and over again, Russia is not Serbia. Russia is not Iraq. Wake up. The Russians are not going to take any of this lying down. What you're seeing the Russians do is understandable in the context of what they're trying to achieve. They want to press ahead, eliminate this hateful regime in Kyiv. They want to restore some degree of stability. They would like to negotiate an end to this, but they're doing it all because of the audience that we mentioned at the beginning. They're not just performing for us. They're performing for the rest of the world, trying to demonstrate to the rest of the world that their cause is just, and they are not what we say they are.
Well, you know, now you sound, I'm afraid we're both going to be called Putin apologists now.
Oh, God.
Anytime a man calls for peace, he's now called a Putin apologist. But that's not working anywhere anymore. That's just a standard knee-jerk reaction. And the legions of social media bots that the entire war machine has online are who I see saying things like that. Even Tucker Carlson on Fox News is laughing that off right now because he was named as the number one Putin stooge. This is not a laughing matter. This is death. You last time told us over 150,000 Ukrainians were dead from this. Over 100,000 Russians. Are those numbers still roughly?
No. Only about 20 to 25,000 Russian dead. We keep trying to inflate that number to create the illusion that the Ukrainians have been successful. The Ukrainian dead are somewhere now up at about 160 to 190,000 dead, maybe 200,000. We don't know. They lost tens of thousands of men in and around Bakhmut and these various areas that they've been fighting in over the last 6 or 7 weeks. Terrible losses. I'm sure you must have seen it. A former Marine who is fighting in the so-called Foreign Legion of Ukraine was quoted as saying that people going to Bakhmut are told their life expectancy fighting the Russians is about 4 hours.
What are the Russians using to fight these waves of Ukrainian foreign troops?
75% of all the casualties inflicted result from artillery, rockets, and missiles and mortars.
It's not hand-to-hand small arms fire.
No, very few people are dying from small arms fire. It looks a lot like the World War I battlefield.
Oh my God.
Except that, again, the Russians have this tremendous preponderance in artillery and rockets and missiles and mortars, and they're very accurate. It's very different from the past. They have a very great system. They use quadcopters, unmanned aerial vehicles. They have those downlinked to the batteries. The batteries get instantaneous GPS coordinates, and then they let loose.
So they're using They're using drones to target the artillery.
Yes, of course. They bring these drones over right on top of the soldiers that are in their fortifications or
Oh my God.
trenches, as well as the enemy's artillery. Ukrainian artillery is destroyed left and right the same way.
We don't see any of this. It's hidden from the media. It's hidden.
Well, that's one of the problems right now. People are going to be shocked when the truth comes out at some point on a number of different fronts, I suspect. March may turn out to be the month.
You think shortly, once the ground freezes over? Or
no, I think things are crumbling in southern Ukraine, and they have been for a few weeks now. And I think that you're going to see incremental movement of hundreds of thousands of troops forward, but they're not going to announce it. It's just going to happen. And remember, they're not stupid. They know that we can track their movements. They know that we're providing location data for Russian forces.
For Ukrainian forces.
Yeah, or excuse me, Ukrainian forces, yes.
I'm listening
and so
to
they're
every
being
word.
very methodical.
But so wait, this is important for me as a civilian. The Russians can target Ukrainian troop emplacements
Yes.
very accurately because of drones.
Right.
The Ukrainians can track Russian troop movements and emplacements very accurately because we provide data to them from satellites, correct?
Yes, mostly satellites, because a lot of their drones have been shot down or don't operate any longer.
Well, that leads me to the next big question. Does anyone know? Do the Russians have the capacity to shoot down United States satellites that are providing this kind of GPS?
Yes.
Do you think they will? Will we have a Star Wars?
I think that right now the concern is as follows. There's something called the Kessler effect. The Kessler effect, this is a physicist who determined that if you begin destroying satellites, you create clouds of debris in space, and you risk destroying your own satellites. Remember, everything is in an orbit that is very carefully constructed. So virtually everything, thousands of satellites up there, are moving on independent paths, but they're all deconflicted. Now, if you start destroying 5, 6, 7, 8, then you get this debris, and it begins to play havoc with everything.
Oh, my God.
So I think the Russians have decided, at least for the moment, no. But again, it's like everything else. If you press the envelope, you push it hard enough.
Yeah, they don't care about tomorrow. It's got to be today. I understand how they work. I also understand the Russian military mind because I, as an amateur, have studied it. And they have a totally different concept of warfare than we do. And that is they'll burn men up if they have to, won't they?
Well, right now, I'd say no, and I'll tell you why. I think they have been extremely careful about not wasting manpower. The quickest way to be relieved on the Russian side is to sacrifice people needlessly. Putin is very sensitive to it. He's sensitive to it because of the public opinion and support for the war.
Colonel, he's like a liberal in the Russian domestic.
Well, there's one more reason that you've got to put into the calculus, and that is very simply, he doesn't know what we're going to do. In other words, he wants to crush the Ukrainian army, but he wants his force to be intact because he's afraid that we will be stupid and that we will try to intervene on the ground in Western Ukraine.
Oh, I believe we will.
He's afraid if that happens, then he must have his army largely intact to deal with it.
Well, I fear the same thing. I brought it up a little earlier. I actually fear that this crazy administration could send ground troops in. They're already there. We agree. It's logical that we have special forces manning, instructing, advising, whatever. How big a step is it to send troops to actually fight the Russians, which they're no doubt doing? You and I probably know, you better than me, that we have snipers who are killing Russians. Wouldn't you say that's a likely possibility?
At the moment, no, I don't think it is. There may be some, but not very many. I think most of what we have over there in civilian clothes are so-called contractors operating in staffs, operating high-end conventional warfare. What am I talking about? Your HIMARS, your rocket artillery that we've been giving the Ukrainians, it's all operated by Westerners. You know, when these so-called Leopard tanks arrive, they're going to have to be operated by Europeans,
Germans,
that are in NATO, because the Ukrainians cannot be rapidly trained to use these things. One Ukrainian posted, or several Ukrainians actually posted on their blogs, we may be allowed to drive the equipment, but the rest of it will be out of our hands.
I get it. Aiming, targeting, firing. Yes. Colonel, any last thoughts? The great title today, again, Everyone Should Be Afraid of War. I'm going to call this podcast, Colonel MacGregor, Everyone Should Be Afraid of War. Does that summarize it all?
I think so. And we need to sober up and understand that this war can visit us.
How?
Well, we could end up fighting with the Russians, and the Russians will no longer treat our continental United States as an untouchable sanctuary.
What do you mean, use a submarine-based launch?
Of course. They can also sink anything that comes in or goes out of our harbors. They can play havoc with us. By the way, you pointed out that the southern border's been open. We've got 2.5 million illegals in the country, thousands of Chinese, thousands of Russians. I was told yesterday that last year, an estimated 20,000 Russians entered the country illegally. Now, I'm sure most of these people wanted to come for various reasons, but if you think all 20,000 did, you're out of your mind.
You mean some of them are military operatives?
Probably.
You know, that's what worries me as a broadcaster. Ukrainian assassins, Russian assassins on our soil intervene.
Well, we have to understand, Doctor, that we are not invulnerable.
Oh, I know that. I know that personally.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been attacked just last week in a restaurant. Something happened. I don't even want to bring it up because it'll trigger. These things are, and I didn't say it was a Russian or Ukrainian. It wasn't. But we have our own indigenous violent streak, an indigenously violent streak of people in this country who are hands off right now with their hatred and their militancy. I actually am surprised that we haven't seen more of what you are, hinting at, but I'd rather not go down that road any more than you do. I suspect that if it gets worse on the war plane, it's going to get worse on the domestic plane as well through such activities as you hinted at just now.
Well, we're definitely on the path to more than one financial crisis.
What about all these railroad derailments? What is that? Is that foreign? Is that Russians playing with our computers?
No, I think we've done these things to ourselves. Okay. We have enough stupid people out there.
I'm sorry for asking. Pete Buttigieg, how can I ask any further? He was busy doing child rearing. I get it. And all the other rear admirals that we have in the Navy. I get that. Last question. Again, it's always an interest in me. The Russians and we have these huge submarines, which I'm fascinated by. One of these gigantic submarines was just mothballed by Russia, one of the giant whales that they built in the 70s. But they still have submarines with ICBMs on them, correct?
Yes.
Colonel, do we know how many nuclear weapons can be fired from a Russian submarine at any one time?
I'm sure we do. That's not an area of expertise for me, obviously. But I'm sure you could find a naval expert that can come on and tell you a great deal about it.
But they could take out a number of American cities with the press of a button.
Oh, of course.
Oh, God.
And keep in mind that our submarine fleet is, in my judgment, too small.
Small?
It's too small. It should be much larger. We are primarily a maritime and aerospace power, so you don't want to skimp on submarines. Today, in the Navy, they will privately tell you there are only two classes of ships: submarines and targets. So the age of the big surface fleet is over.
I got it.
And the great strength of the American Navy is really its submarine fleet. I don't think it's, as I said, I feel it's too small, and we made bad decisions over many years, pouring money into the wrong things, sort of the way we poured money into battleships before World War II.
Yes.
We've been pouring money into carrier battle groups and other things, but we really needed to pour it into submarines.
Well, you need
Colonel,
you need
I just want to say the good news is that our submariners are excellent.